And now your commencement speaker. It is I. First, congratulations again to all 436 of you and each one of you individually. Let's just review a little bit about you. You come from 40 states and territories and 24 different countries. You make up 1.3% of all Amherst graduates ever. You are going to earn the 33,321st through the 33,763rd degrees from the college. 39% of you have more than one major. And what do you think the top majors are for the class of 2016? Oh, well, I guess you're all right. It's economics, mathematics, psychology, English, and political science. And that's a liberal arts spread, so good for you. By the way, 69% of you took a language course. 39% of you took a poetry course. That makes me very happy. Some people are raising their hands for that honor. Good. 11% of you took a music lesson, and many more of you took music courses. 45% of you studied abroad. Your accomplishments are legion, and not all of them are visible. But some of the distinctions about which we know include national fellowships, which you won a disproportionate share of, and among them a Beinecke, 11 Fulbright fellowships that will take you all over the world to teach and do research. One of you was awarded a Schwartzman Scholarship in the first year of this new award, modeled on the Rhodes. And of the 49 scholarships awarded to United States citizens or recent graduates, 3 are from Amherst College. Two of you were finalists for the Marshall. 2 of you have won the highly coveted Watson Fellowships. Yes, congratulations. And the 2 of you who won Watsons are going to be studying sweeping transitions and communities displaced by climate change, also all over the world. In athletics, your teams over the past 4 years have won an astonishing 14 NESCAC titles. Yeah. You have won, that is, your teams have won 3 NCAA titles. 52 of you have been named All-Americans, and 9 of you are NCAA individual champions. Congratulations to all of you. Of the many other forms of competition in which you were engaged, I'm going to mention only a few, and I like mentioning the ones that hone your rhetorical skills. So you've competed in debate, Model UN, and mock trial, and I hope you've enjoyed all of them. You've given inspired performances of all kinds in music, theater, dance, comedy. I'm thinking, of course, of Mr. Gadd's, the DeSac Show, the Women of Amherst, our a cappella groups, the chorus, the orchestra, the jazz combo, the staging of Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods, your theses, your thesis performances, your leadership of student government, your leadership of student sit-ins, your work for the student newspaper, your writings for the student blogs. You designed new ways to branch out socially. Okay, that's just a small portion. But what will you do next? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of our alumni go on to graduate or professional school. And for as long as we've been keeping records, which is many decades, Harvard and Columbia have been the top destinations. Some of you are going to go directly to graduate or professional school. And among your destinations are Harvard, Columbia, University of Pennsylvania, Syracuse, Calgary, Yale, Princeton, Texas at Austin, Northwestern, BU, the University of Cambridge. And you're going on in areas from geology, tectonics, physics, computational biology, philosophy of science, medicine, law, educational psychology, education, international relations, history, film, and architecture. And that's not everything. In Washington, D.C., one of you will serve as a congressional fellow on the Hunger Task Force of the Congress, another as a healthcare consultant at Booz Allen, still another as a fellow in the postbac research program of the NIH. In Seattle, one of you will work as a brand specialist at Amazon, another as a software engineer at Microsoft, another as a consultant in finance. In San Francisco, one of you will be working for the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice. A significant number of you will be employed in the tech industry, Facebook, Google, LiveRamp, LinkedIn, Yelp, Evident. I think also Yik Yak, but I'm not going there. 5 women graduates of the computer science department, I hear, are going to be living together in a 5-bedroom house in San Francisco. And 4 of the 5 were referred to their jobs by other female Amherst computer science graduates. Welcome to the community. Yeah. One of you will be in Springfield, at least. You'll take part in the data analysis program at MassMutual. And in Hull, Massachusetts, one of you will be teaching and coaching soccer while getting an advanced degree. A significant number of you are going to work in finance and consulting at a range of firms in New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, and other countries. Good luck to all of you. And a significant number will also be teaching next year. And I love celebrating teaching. You'll be teaching as part of Teach for America. You'll be teaching in public school systems in LA and other parts of the country, in charter schools and private boarding schools. And one of you will be teaching in China. And the graduate who's teaching in China dropped out of high school to take care of his siblings, served in Iraq, worked his way through night school and community college to get to Amherst, was an intern at Amherst Middle School, served as a fellow at the Career Center, majored in English, wrote an honors thesis that compiled his original poetry and his work in narrative medicine. What an example, Craig. You're graduating at quite a time. It's a kind of head-shaking time. That's what you get from a lot of people these days. They just shake their heads, confused, surprised, some alarmed. I thought it might be good to look back. So I went back 100 years exactly, to 1916. Amherst President Alexander Meiklejohn was worried about the war in Europe. The United States had not yet gotten involved in World War I. He was focused on a presidential election that was later won by Woodrow Wilson. He predicted that neither candidate would show a lack of respect to the other. What worried him, though, was what he saw as an increasingly popular and a dangerous view of human nature, one that considered our crassest impulses and conflict to be more fundamental than sympathy or reason, one that assumed that might makes right. And for his speech on commencement weekend, Meiklejohn chose to talk about the golden rule, what it means to love thy neighbor as thyself. And here's a quote. "Over the past 2 years," he said, "we have heard men say more clearly than ever before that the law of life is strife. If there be any good to have, then you must take it for yourself. And if another wish it too, then he must fight, unless the weaker has enough sense to shun conflict and look around to find a weaker than himself from whom to take whatever good he has." End of quote. And Meiklejohn made the golden rule a matter of philosophical reflection for the graduates in 1916 by asking them to consider Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. I quote Kant, "Act according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law." For Meiklejohn, The purpose of liberal arts education is to subject our common sense assumptions to philosophical or critical reflection and to be able to evaluate them for what they're worth. Human beings, or men, as Meiklejohn put it in 1916, are not merely creatures of desire and emotion who take what they can get. They try to evaluate their desires and to judge what they're worth. And for a liberally educated person, or what Meiklejohn called a college man, the principle that should guide their choices would be clear. It would be fellowship, not strife. In his writings, Kant made his father an example of the qualities on which his moral philosophy was based. And in his father, he saw moderation, humility, tolerance, and restraint. Those qualities are critical to democracy. They are also essential to freedom. Not the freedom to indulge our worst impulses, but the freedom to think, to reason, to evaluate our desires and passions, and to value our neighbors as ourselves. Freedom is a gift that is granted by a community of people, each of whom deserves that gift as much as you or I, and to whom, therefore, we have a responsibility by virtue of our freedom. Freedom without integrity or concern for others is a failure of moral imagination. It is a form of narcissism. In her essay on imagination and community, the contemporary writer Marilynne Robinson reminds us that the intellectual model for the older schools in America was a religious tradition that loved the soul and the mind and was meant to encourage the exploration and refinement of both of them. That was, and it still is, the purpose of the liberal arts and the mission of Amherst College, even if we now talk about it in secular terms. In the political realm, important though it is, the soul often comes up short, and sometimes the mind does too. In the absence of respect for our human innerness and the rewards of sharing our humanity, we are lost. And so the word soul does not seem like too big a risk to me at the moment, when we need words that point us to aspects of personhood that our political categories and political speech do not respect. If there has ever been a time when we need to recognize the value of our own lives and the lives of others as our own, and there have been many such times, this is also the time. I think of the millions of refugees around the world who are fleeing war and death. It is important, in the words of historian William Cronin, to recognize the power of other people's dreams and nightmares. It is essential that we work against indifference, fear, and objectification. That can be done regardless of your profession or your politics. Taken together, all the intellectual disciplines that fall under the liberal arts help us do just that. They make reason and understanding, freedom and generosity their ground and their purpose. These values have special significance at times when we face the kinds of forces that sometimes intensify and coalesce to bring out the worst in people, forces that drive us away from our principles and drive us away from one another, forces that have repeatedly led only to bad outcomes or outright disasters: intolerance, demonization, xenophobia, simplistic ideas, the cult of personality, the cynical dismissal of all forms of respect and restraint as weakness. The impact of these evils, when they coalesce and become forceful, lasts for generations, bequeathing to the future tremendous burdens, moral and otherwise. My scholarly field is German literature, but you do not need to be a student of German culture to understand the toll that Nazi atrocities have taken. first and foremost on those against whom the atrocities were committed, but also on their surviving relatives, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, on the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren of Germans too. Chris Bojalin has written about the Armenian genocide. There are too many examples. These catastrophes take a toll too on our ability to trust our own humanity. And it is true for the impact of slavery in the United States and forced segregation and discrimination with which we have not come to terms. There are many examples of lasting damage, and they cannot be removed quickly by passing a law or making apologies. And they can never be removed by denial. The liberal arts, with its combination of scientific and mathematical knowledge, humanistic and social scientific inquiry, and the arts, is a form of education that was intended to counter autocratic rule, superstition, intolerance, prejudice, not by exerting partisan political influence or insisting on political correctness. Instead, by giving us the tools to question what we take for granted, as Dak has already said, and to judge the worthiness of our own passions. But no form of education can guarantee that we will choose to free ourselves and reap the rewards of new knowledge and personal transformation. It is in the nature of freedom that we can choose not to exercise our intelligence, not to choose science over ideology, not to choose curiosity over demonization. It is in the nature of our freedom that we can choose to worship at the altar of affect and outrage. We can choose to indulge our fears and grab what we can from the weaker. But we cannot make those choices without costs. There is a notion with a brutal history, writes Marilyn Robinson, that a homogeneous country is more peaceful and stable, and in a very deep sense, more satisfying than one with a complex and mingled population like ours. To an alarming extent, she adds, we in the United States have internalized this prejudice against ourselves. There is no strength or greatness in the nightmare of prejudice and exclusion. And when it comes down to it, thinking and respect are the qualities that take the greatest strength and build the greatest strength. Amherst has a complex and mingled population, intentionally so. Why? Because talent crosses all boundaries, and high-quality educational opportunities should too. And because we realize, as plenty of research shows, that we come to better conclusions, we're smarter when different life experiences and points of view are taken into account. We bring you together from groups that have been divided from and also against one another by social and economic forces with a long and difficult history. And therefore, it is not always comfortable to be in this beautiful place. Fellowship is not always easy. Why would people expect it to be? It requires love of the mind and the soul and their refinement. It requires that we acknowledge the power of other people's dreams and nightmares. And that is why we're here together in person, in a place privileged to be learning from one another. No intellectual community worthy of the name can always be at one with itself. It is by definition a searching, restless, and often argumentative community. And it is natural to want relief from what Amherst professor Adam Zeitz calls this exhausting obligation to think, be wrong, rethink, be wrong, and rethink again. Relief, comfort, and familiarity are critical, but we need to make them the springboard for adventure, risk, crossings, and friendship. We can make friends with uncertainty and fallibility, and we can make friends with one another, but not through indifference, intolerance, or denial. Amherst has been here for almost 200 years, cheerleading in its own way for reason, understanding, conversation, and a community that is not one. It will continue to give students an unrivaled opportunity to absorb the ideas and the values that are essential not only to personal success, but also to creating the world that we say we want, the opposite of where our most visceral instincts take us when we're afraid. A great liberal arts education should be a leading source of resistance to anti-rational forces of manipulated fear and hatred. And I hope you will choose to use your education in that way. You're entering a world that will make it hard at times for you to value adequately what you can do with your minds. In the face of anti-intellectualism that gains force at times like this, I hope you will remember what a gift you have and what a gift you are by virtue of the athleticism of your minds. Use that athleticism to combine freedom with integrity, critique with devotion, earnestness with irony, protest with cheerleading. Mercedes. These are only apparent opposites that we have to be capable of joining together, never the one without the other. You are now joining one of the most significant sources of attachment and community in the United States, college and university alumni bodies. I'll go back to Robinson, who says, "We choose our colleges if we have a choice in order to be formed by them. If the graft takes," she continues, "we consider ourselves ever after to be members of that community. And as one consequence, graduates tend to treat the students who come after them as kin and also as heirs." And if you think of the generosity of our alumni, you are indeed heirs and kin of those alumni. They take pride in the successes of people in classes 40 years behind them or ahead of them. They have a familial desire to enhance the experience of students who are in fact strangers. In just a moment, you're going to become one of those people who cares about the successes of people who come behind you, because you know that education and intellectual versatility or athleticism matter. So welcome to the beginning of a new position in the Amherst community. And now I leave you, as I leave every graduating class, with my favorite short poem by A.R. Ammons. It's called Salute. May happiness pursue you, catch you often, and should it lose you, be waiting ahead, making a clearing for you. Congratulations to the graduates.